we describe our encounter with him at his home in Tuscany.
Our civilization is plenty of records of everyday life, in movies, television, the papers. I think that literature has to give something more.
We also talked to the playwright Simon Gray about his new book. Quite happy if his readers fail to detect any continuity between one book and the next. Hence there is no big Calvino title, nor is there any single book that could be called typical Calvino. His reputation has grown gradually since he started writing in the 40s, but even when people began speaking of him as Italy's best novelist, he himself remained aloof from the celebrity machine. In his youth he was involved in left-wing politics, and for 20 years he worked as an editor in a leading Italian publishing house. In the 1970s he became a world figure, but still nobody seemed to know very much about him. Magazine profiles of Calvino tended to run out of information after the first 3 paragraphs or so. This month he publishes a new book, Mr. Palomar, a collection of brief, touching and ironic meditations, the inner life of a compulsive watcher. It was Mr. Palomar that stirred my interest in Calvino, but the book that really fired my curiosity was If on a Winter's Night, a Traveller. If any of his books contains the whole Calvino, that's to say the writer at his peak, using the whole range of his resources, then this one surely does. From the first page, the first sentence even, the reader is aware that something very strange is happening.
To begin. But how to establish the exact moment when a story begins? The lives of individuals of the human race form a constant plot in which every attempt to isolate one piece of living that has a meaning separate from the rest, for example, the meeting of 2 people, which will become decisive for both, must bear in mind that each of the 2 brings with himself a texture of events, environments, other people, and that from that meeting, in turn, other stories will be derived, which will break off from their common story. You are about to begin reading Italo Calvino's new novel, If on a Winter's Night, a Traveller. Relax. Concentrate. Try to foresee now everything that might make you interrupt your reading. Cigarettes within reach, if you smoke, and the ashtray. Anything else? Do you have to pee? All right, you know best. So, here you are now, ready to attack the first lines of the first page. You prepare to recognize the unmistakable tone of the author. But now that you think about it, whoever said this author had an unmistakable tone? On the contrary, he is known as an author who changes greatly from one book to the next. And in these very changes, you recognize him as himself. Here, however, he seems to have absolutely no connection with all the rest he has written, at least as far as you can recall. Are you disappointed? Let's see. The novel begins in a railway station. A locomotive huffs. Steam from a piston covers the opening of the chapter. A cloud of smoke hides part of the first paragraph. In the odor of the station, there is a passing whiff of station cafe odor. A whistling sound like a locomotive's, and a cloud of steam rise from the coffee machine that the old counterman puts under pressure, as if he were sending up a signal, or at least so it seems from the series of sentences in the second paragraph. For a couple of pages now you've been reading on, and this will be the time to tell you clearly whether this station where I have got off is a station of the past or a station of today. Instead, the sentences continue to move in vagueness, grayness, in a kind of no man's land of experience, reduced to the lowest common denominator. Watch out. It is surely a method of involving you gradually, capturing you in the story before you realize it. A trap.
This is a book that's full of traps, isn't it?
Well, I think it's a whole series of traps and traps within traps, not only for the reader, but also for the translator, I'm afraid. The basic structure of the book is a series of first chapters of novels, which two characters called the reader and the other reader, a man and a woman, are trying to read. And they keep, for one reason or another, they can never get beyond chapter 1. They keep thinking they're going to find chapter 2, but instead they find chapter 1 of yet another novel. In the meanwhile, there are all sorts of international plots. There's a wicked translator, one of the characters, I'm afraid.
Of course, Calvino himself keeps on saying his work is untranslatable, doesn't he?
Oh, he's right. No, Calvino's work is everything is untranslatable, but Calvino's books are particularly difficult because although he doesn't use, words that you don't know the meaning of or can't look up, he writes in a very special, very deceptively simple way.
In If on a Winter's Night, there is a mystery, a hero, and a search. But the search is not for gold or love or virtue. It's a search for fiction, for a novel called If on a Winter's Night. A novel that keeps starting, but 10 times refuses to proceed past chapter 1. The hero is determined and intrepid, but his quest is forever circumscribed, because he too has been invented by Calvino. Calvino has been called a juggler, an alchemist, a kind of devilish laboratory novelist whose delight is in concealment and manipulation. His ideal reader, he has said, is the one who is content to meet him on the page and leave it there. Calvino has homes in Paris and in Rome, but his true retreat is to be found in Tuscany, 2 hours from Rome by train. His rural anonymity seems well protected. At the local station bookstall, they had 1 or 2 of his books, but they didn't seem to know he was a neighbor.
No, è terminato questo. Notte d'inverno di un viaggiatore, no? No. Soltanto le cosmicomiche per adesso.
No. Ok, grazie. Calvino was brought up in a tourist resort, San Remo, but he had little taste for its seafront vulgarity.
Bambini, vi aspettiamo numerosi domenica mattina alle ore 9:30.
I came from the Western Riviera. From the landscape of my town, I deliberately obliterated the whole tourist seaboard. The promenade with its palm trees, casinos, hotels, villas, almost as if I were ashamed of them. I started from the alleys in the old town, climbed the mule tracks over the fertile ridges to the edge of the pine woods.
Today, further south in Tuscany, the pine wood has become Calvino's home, and it's a short walk to his private beach. The tourist seaboard is just about visible by telescope. It is with some reserve that Calvino receives this visiting reader from abroad, but he agrees to answer a few questions, and in English, beginning with If on a Winter's Night.
The idea was to write a novel about reading novels. It's a book which was very difficult to plan and also difficult to write because there are several styles. In many books, in the last books I've written, I always complicate my ideas. I draw patterns, schemas, and I put to myself rules then that not always I respect. In some way, I am always complicating my life. I don't know why.
Did you have that kind of scheme for this book?
Yes, if you want, I may show you some manuscript to show you how I work.
Mr. Palomar suffers greatly because of his difficulty in establishing relations with his fellow man. He envies those people who have the gift of always finding the right thing to say, the right greeting for everyone. People who are at ease with anyone they happen to encounter and put others at their ease. These gifts, Palomar thinks with the regret of the man who lacks them, are granted to those who live in harmony with the world. It is natural for them to establish an accord not only with people, but also with things, places, situations.
My pages are always very tormented. It's always a mess, my manuscripts. You see here there is the she reader, the not reader. Here is writing as life, and here is writing as mystification. And there is I don't remember what I meant with my little drawings I did. Yeah, sometimes I get crazy when I am writing, you see. I tried to give a symmetry, a geometry to my plot. For instance, this is a sort of diagram, but perhaps it's better I explain it in Italian. C'è una serie di scelte che portano a vari tipi di romanzo. La prima scelta tra un romanzo minimal, in cui tutte le sensazioni sono ridotte al minimo, che è rappresentato dal primo inizio di romanzo, quello che si svolge nella stazione, che qui definisco il romanzo della nebbia.
Each of the tantalizing first chapters that Calvino builds into his ultra novel is a cunning pastiche of some known style of narrative, both highbrow and commercial. And each style is meant to embody a different philosophy or mood. The range is international, from Belgium to Japan, and all fictional appetites are catered for. Calvino's versatility is dazzling, but he also seems to be suggesting that most of these old, straightforward narrative techniques have had their day.
I tried to do my homage to the novel, to the traditional novel. I did it in a new way, in the way of the new novel, but in some way is a sort of revaluation of revival of old forms of novel.
It's not an epitaph. It's a homage.
Not an epitaph. It's a revival.
If On a Winter's Night was published 6 years ago, and it's hard to believe that the author of this novel to end all novels was once thought of as a realist. In 1945, Calvino says, we Italians were moving in a multicolored universe of stories. The professional author was in competition with his audience. Every Italian had his or her war story to recount. It was in this atmosphere that the 22-year-old Calvino began writing, and his first book, A Path to the Nest of Spiders, was based on his own wartime service with the partisans. The book was a success, but Calvino was for years afterwards, he says, filled with remorse. For the sake of literary distinctiveness, he had turned his comrades into characters, grotesques.
I set to work and altered the faces and characters of people who had been my dearest comrades, with whom for months and months I had shared a mess tin of chestnuts and the risk of death, for whose safety I had trembled. And I made masks contracted by perpetual grimaces, grotesque little characters, only to be torn with remorse for years.
There would be other realistic stories, but Calvino had learned with his first publication that fiction should never be in debt to fact. During the 1950s, he published 3 lengthy comic fables, or fantastical romances, including the hugely popular The Baron in the Trees. He also compiled a collection of Italian folk tales, digging them up and, in the main, rewriting them.
I started working on folk tales more than 30 years ago. My publisher asked me to make a collection of Italian folk tales, a general collection, which didn't exist. There were a lot of regional collection done by the folklorists of the last century in the different dialects, and I went through this huge forest of tales, and I choose and I rewrote, translating from the dialects, I rewrote in the same spirit, and this was a very important work for me. I thought that the real popular taste in fiction was fantasy, was not realism, was a way to speak about very real problems. Italian folk tales are plenty of hungry peasants in the fields, but all transfigurated by fantasy. It's not escape from reality to give a fantastic shape. Is a way to look inside ourselves and inside our problems. And now that our civilization has plenty of records of everyday life, in movies, television, the papers, I think that literature has to give something more as a fantastic interpretation of reality. At a certain moment, I tried my special sort of science fiction, a fiction of the last origins of the universe. What I tried to do was to start producing myths from modern science.
Climb up on the moon? Of course we did. All you had to do was row out to it in a boat, and when you were underneath, prop a ladder against her and scramble up. Now you'll ask me what in the world we went up on the moon for. I'll explain it to you. We went to collect the milk with a big spoon and a bucket. Moon milk was very thick, like a kind of cream cheese. It formed in the crevices between one scale and the next through the fermentation of various bodies and substances of terrestrial origin which had flown up from the prairies and forests and lakes as the moon sailed over them. It was composed chiefly of vegetal juices, tadpoles, bitumen, lentils, honey, starch, crystals, sturgeon eggs, molds, pollens, gelatinous matter, worms, resins, pepper, mineral salts, combustion residue. You had only to dip the spoon under the scales that covered the moon's scabby terrain, and you brought it out filled with that precious muck.
With Cosmic Comics, Calvino broke through into the beginnings of world recognition. During the 1960s, he wrote further science fables, but he also began to brood upon the theory of the novel. What is a tale? Who tells it? And to whom? In his book, Invisible Cities, he gets Marco Polo himself to voyage beyond the boundaries of simple narrative. Polo reports to Kubla Khan on the 50 or so wondrous cities he's explored. Living among trees, Calvino dreams of a city where everybody's head is in the clouds.
Dopo aver marciato 7 giorni attraverso boscaglie, chi va a Bauci non riesce a vederla.
After a 7 days' march through woodland, The traveller directed towards Borsis cannot see the city, and yet he has arrived. The slender stilts that rise from the ground at a great distance from one another and are lost above the clouds support the city. You climb them with ladders. On the ground, the inhabitants rarely show themselves. Having already everything they need up there, they prefer not to come down. Nothing of the city touches the earth except those long flamingo legs on which it rests. And when the days are sunny, a pierced angular shadow that falls on the foliage.
Tre ipotesi si danno sugli abitanti di Bauci: che odino la terra, che la rispettino al punto di evitare ogni contatto, che la amino com'era prima di loro e con cannocchiali e telescopi puntati in giù non si stanchino di passarla in rassegna, foglia a foglia, sasso a sasso, formica per formica, contemplando affascinati la propria assenza.
And you often have situations in which speech isn't possible.
Well, the problem with the speech for me is important because for me to talk, I had always problems with speech, not only in a foreign language, also in my own language. And so problem of speech and of silence is a problem. I always need to write to be sure to express myself completely. And my last book is a book about silence in some way. It's a character who wants to see things, to see completely, to read things, like a single wave in the sea, or the stars in the sky, or the moon. Always a bit frustrating, but he tries always to understand something.
Because he could easily be a writer, couldn't he?
Well, but he's described in the moment before writing.
The sea is barely wrinkled, and little waves strike the sandy shore. Mr. Palomar is standing on the shore looking at a wave. Not that he's lost in contemplation of the waves. He's not lost, because he's quite aware of what he's doing. He wants to look at a wave, and he's looking at it. Mr. Palomar sees a wave rise in the distance, grow, approach, change form and color, fold over itself, break, vanish, and flow again. At this point, he could convince himself that he has concluded the operation he had set out to achieve, and he could go away. But it's very difficult to isolate one wave, separating it from the wave immediately following it, which seems to push it and at times overtakes it and sweeps it away. Just as it is difficult to separate that one wave from the wave that precedes it and seems to drag it towards the shore, unless it turns against its follower as if to arrest it. Then if you consider the breadth of the wave parallel to the shore, it is hard to decide where the advancing front extends regularly and where it is separated and segmented into independent waves, distinguished by their speed, shape, force, direction. Since what Mr. Palomar means to do at this moment is simply to see a wave, that is to perceive all its simultaneous components without overlooking any of them, his gaze will dwell on the movement of the wave that strikes the shore until it can record aspects not previously perceived. As soon as he notices that the images are being repeated, he will know he has seen everything he wanted to see, and he will be able to stop. A nervous man who lives in a frenzied and congested world, Mr. Palomar tends to reduce his relations with the outside world. And to defend himself against the general neurasthenia, he tries to keep his sensations under control, insofar as possible.